Hello, hello. And I think it says that we are live and streaming on the Facebook. Welcome.
Just like that.
Just like that. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. My name is Susan McCulley. Welcome to the Age of Becoming, and welcome in particular to Tanya Geisler. Tanya, I am so delighted that you are here today. You and I are going to have a conversation about the imposter complex. I'll just say as way of introduction, you are a certified leadership coach. You have given TEDx talks and are a speaker and are working through the world helping people act on their impeccable mission. Yeah?
Yes. That's absolutely correct.
And I was turned on to your work through my teacher and coach, Tiffany Han. And she sung your praises, and I thought to myself, oh, imposter complex is not a thing for me. And but given that I love Tiffany and I trust her impeccably, I went to your website and took the quiz and found out, oh no, it is a thing for me. And I have been seeing it in people in my community, in my life. And I just wanted to talk to you about it. But in particular, the Age of Becoming is a place where we have empowering practices for embodiment for women who are over 50, give or take. Mm-hmm. So I'm in particular interested in talking about that demographic, but let's launch in and tell me something that's just got your attention today.
Okay. Because,
so much.
2021. Yes. My husband works for Red Cross. So, what's really on my mind is India right now. I'm just really paying, it's interesting living with somebody who, it's such a strange thing. I wasn't expecting that question. It's a great question. When the pandemic first started and we were in this like, what is going to happen, trying to find something to be able to hook into. It was really affirming being married to somebody who works for the Red Cross, because I always knew what was happening in the world. I always knew what the Red Cross was planning for next. It was almost encouraging when the Red Cross would go into appeals for floods, because it was like, oh God, we don't have to pay. And also, when everything's happening, like it's right there. It's right in our house. So that's the almost honest answer from me right now. I'm just thinking about all of the, what's happening in India. That's what's got my attention today. And also, so that, and then I was actually trying to write about this morning. I do a monthly roundup in my newsletter where I just talk about the month that was. And so what I'm really sitting on top of right now is the confluence of emotions. What April 2021 has meant, with so much rage and so much worry and so much loss and so much devastation. And here in North America, buds are blooming and life is happening. And it's sometimes just so extraordinary to just live inside these bodies of ours that hold so many emotions.
Yes. It does feel like an extraordinary confluence right now. And, mm-hmm. And so much is emerging, and yet there, in uncertainty, mm-hmm. reigns, as it always does, as if we needed one more reminder of this.
Right.
Yeah. I so hear this. I also will just put in a plug in for your wonderful newsletter for people to sign up for that. I get a lot of them, and I unsubscribe to a lot of them, and yours is not one of them. I always look forward to your thoughts, and I appreciate too what you're saying about these transitional times at the end of the month can be a nice time, but to really hold everything that we are navigating.
Yeah, right? It's so extraordinary. I had a speaking gig on Tuesday night with the most amazing group of young women entrepreneurs, young women, and I was thinking about a lot about them in advance of this conversation. And there was this, I had my first vaccine dose on Monday. And I was not prepared. So we have AstraZeneca here in Canada, which can have some strange kinds of reactions. But, you know, anecdotally, I was hearing that it's going to affect you probably at the 10-hour mark. It walloped me at the 24-hour mark. So I thought I was in the clear. So I had a 7:30 speaking gig, and about 6:30, my family was piled on top of me with ow, I just hit my, oh, God. They were piled on top of me trying to keep me warm because I was so, anyway, I managed to do the speaking gig, but there was, so all this to say, somebody was asking about how, because I was having quite the fever and so somebody was asking about that. And my husband in a text said, oh, you know, life is so cruel. You know, Tanya had a speaking gig and she had a fever, but I was perfectly fine and I was watching TV. It's like, isn't that just the worst? And in the same conversation as we're talking about what's happening in India, like, no, that's the worst, right? And this is what we're sitting on top of right now. There's all of this profound, you know, again, grief, rage, uncertainty. I have had some of the lowest lows, and then my daughter turned 17, and that was so delightful. And it's just an extraordinary time. And like you said, it's always been here. We're just navigating different ways. So
right. And here's part of I'm segueing now.
Yeah.
Here's part of what I love about the way you talk about the imposter complex, in that the behaviors around it are not intrinsically problematic. And in fact, can very often bring us together in some ways. And you said to me when we were talking not long ago, it's like those behaviors are not a problem until they are.
Yeah.
Right. So let me just say that that the imposter complex sets us up to feel like we don't belong, right? And to feel isolated. And again, speaking to April 2021, we have literally been isolated. The things that we belong to, if we still belong, we belong in a very different way. And so to me, it feels like if we had any tendencies toward feeling like an imposter, any tendencies to feeling like we don't belong, the whole situation, the whole web of circumstances have set us up to really be reinforced in our feeling in that way.
Yeah. So there are 6 really specific behavioral traits. And I think it's just important to name what we're talking about, because we're sort of talking around it. And you'll hear Susan and I talk about, you know, not talking to listeners, talking about the imposter complex. And I think most people usually understand it to be imposter syndrome. My SEO people get super pissed that I don't use imposter syndrome, but I use imposter complex because it's not a medical, it's not a clinical diagnosis. That's the reasons. If you're hearing like, is this the same thing? Yes, it is fundamentally the same thing. I'm just really precise about the language. But I was speaking with somebody today in France, and she was like, I don't have the imposter complex. I just have like profound comparison that has me feeling like I don't belong, or I have this that has me feeling like I don't belong. And so I talk about these 6 behavioral traits because I think that those are what we identify more with. And they are manifestations of the experience. So those are diminishment and comparison and perfectionism and people pleasing and leaky boundaries and procrastination. And to your point, yes, intrinsically, they are not problematic until such time as they are. And I'm happy to go into any of those too. But one of the things I think is really, you know, I'm noticing specific trends as it relates to the current reality. For one thing, perfectionism is kind of on the downswing, because times are so extraordinary, because times feel so uncertain. I think we're having a lot more conversations now about the myth of perfection, and also seeing the inextricable link between perfectionism and patriarchy, or perfectionism and white supremacy culture characteristics, right? And so we're like, well, damn, right? Like, why am I colluding?
I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that. Like, what am I colluding with this behavior? And also, we are really seeing just how imperfect we really are. So that's a for better, for worse kind of situation. So I think that is like one of the few reliefs that I think that we can all, like, there is no such thing as certainty. Therefore, it is impossible to achieve the same kind of perfection that was never available to us before anyway.
Right. I was going to say, because there's really no such thing as perfect either, right? I mean, this is something that, it was a word that I grew up with a lot. It's like, oh, that's perfect. Or, and when we really look at it, it really doesn't make any sense. There's really no such thing. So that's interesting. So you're seeing people trending away from that particular set of behaviors. So where are you seeing, in those 6 behavior types, where are you seeing people trend toward?
Diminishment, because so diminishment really shows up in dimming our light, not because things feel so much more acutely. So is it my lane to talk about this? Who am I to be inside of my joy when there's such suffering? What is safe to say? And so that's and that's, again, kind of linked to perfectionism. Like, I want to say the perfect thing. I want to say the right thing. So if I don't have the right thing or the perfect thing, then I'm not going to say anything. So I do find people hedging, diminishing far more. I did a podcast interview last year. My podcast is on a sort of extended hiatus, but I'm hoping to have it back up and running for September. One of the last episodes I did was with Deepa Iyer, where we spoke about social change, roles inside of social change. And that, for me, because that was a really important conversation, because I think a lot of folks, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic, were sort of, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know. And this, and we see this all the time when there's something new that is on the forefront, we don't know how we are supposed to respond. We don't know how we're supposed to react. And what I loved about this conversation with Deepa was, and her framework is about finding where you are most naturally aligned. So part of the suffering and has been, people think, I'm supposed to be the one to fix this all. Again, perfectionism, white supremacy culture characteristics, right? Like, we got to save all the things. That's what we've been taught. But really, it might be more appropriate for your role to be a visionary. It might be more appropriate for your role to be caretaker. It might be, so really finding your role inside is the most powerful thing. And then you have a sense of what your lane is, and then you can operate, right? Because if we don't know what the boundaries are, if we don't know, we're not going to say anything. So if we have an expectation that we need to be the disruptor and the first responder and the healer and the like, all of the things, I'm not getting out of bed.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I have to put my head down even just to hear all of them. I do remember that episode and found it so helpful to realize that there are many roles, which again, it speaks to diminishment. It also speaks to comparison. Right. So that, like, oh, I would be better. It would be better if I was a first responder. Like, those are the good people. Right. And I'm noticing that too. Brene Brown talks sometimes about comparative suffering. Like I can't really be sad or feeling grief because of what's happening in India or what's happening in the Black community or what's happening where it feels comparatively worse, right? Because I sometimes think, when I first think about the imposter complex, I think about comparison in the diminishment of like, oh, she's got all of that going on, and so I don't have space to make myself going on, which has its own issues. But I'm really noticing, like, I've got to be grateful for what I have, even if I'm feeling deeply anxious, even if I'm feeling deeply grief-stricken. It feels connected, the diminishment and the comparison.
They live in the same, I have a framework that I talk about, unshakable confidence, and they live in the same, diminishment and comparison do live in the same space together. So when I talk about unshakable confidence, I'm talking about integrity. I talk about a Venn diagram of integrity and presence and action. And so if we are folks, so in this in the quiz that you're talking about, if folks discern that it's people pleasing or leaky boundaries that's up for them, then it's integrity that we need to pay attention to. Being able to show up really authentically, holding an obedience to our vision. And obedience is none of our favorite words, to be honest. So I've got to find some better language for that. But holding our vision and then honoring our word to ourselves, not to other people, please. That is not our issue, particularly if we are people pleasers or folks with leaky boundaries. But it's going to be like that. That's the work, is can we honor our word to ourselves? So people pleasing and leaky boundaries, not the same thing, but sort of that same category of, am I rooting into my own integrity? The second part is presence. And this is, can I access my own power, or am I fearful of it? Do I have full access to my power? Can I be with support? And the third is, can I hold myself with reverence? And I always get a little hooked on that, because that's so hard for so many of us. How can we hold ourselves with reverence when we were told, perfect is the only ideal? Right? Right? Like it does not equate. So when I hear diminishment or comparison are the things that tend to be most up, that's when I have somebody come back to presence. Like, are you rooting into your power? Right. Can you be with support? Are you holding yourself with reverence? And then finally, the third piece is action. This is about, do we have a willingness to fail? Are we showing up resiliently? Are we showing up tenaciously? And this is usually, this is what I'm paying attention to, if perfectionism or procrastination are really running the show. So all that to say, yes, ding, 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 diminishment, comparison. I might not have all the answers, but can I hold myself with enough reverence to not diminish, to recognize that what I have is sufficient for where we are right now in this moment? Right.
So much. And when you're talking about that, one of the things, a gazillion things come up, but one of the things is that part of what we are endeavoring to do at the age of becoming is embodying our practices, not just learning them, because we can get, information, we've got it, right? The interwebs has given us all the information. And practice allows us to embody. And if we can practice being fully present, like literally in our physical bodies, this allows us, I believe, to then be present to our own values, our own, what matters to us, ourselves, and to each other. Yes. And so I love how this integrates with all kinds of ways of developing presence. And we have experience with this, right? We know what it feels like both in our own skin and to be in the presence of someone who has presence, who is standing in their own power. And it feels very different than someone who is undercutting themselves, right? And who is making jokes about themselves and is in a self-deprecating way. Maybe, and I would actually love you to talk a little bit about that, in that that's something that after being introduced to your work, I started to notice in myself and in others, this tendency to, just, undercut a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think that's inextricably linked to diminishment again. And it's not surprising that we're talking more about diminishment than anything else, because I think it's where we are. I think it's what we've been, I think it sits up against what we've mostly been taught. But this undercutting is this, it's really this, this is there's so many different layers to this. I feel like I see the clock ticking down. I'm like, oh my God.
You have to say all the things. You have to do all the things, Tanya.
Perfectly. Of course. Perfectly. Because somehow I am exempt from this. Yeah. So the undercutting, I love that you said that we understand, like, we feel differently, because the trickster move that I have for people who experience diminishment is to remind them that they are a model of possibility. And this is so resonant with this particular age group, because we get that. We get that, oh, I have this lifetime of experience so far, and I do not have it all figured out, nor should I, nor will I ever. But what I do have is deeply valuable, deeply meaningful. And if I'm going to share my world-changing ideas, if I'm going to lead the movements, if I'm just going to be the best leader that I can be, I need to remember that there are people who are paying attention to me. And I might not have a lot of leaders that are ahead of me that I totally look up to or admire. It's because I am the person that I haven't seen me yet.
Right.
Yeah. So the trickster move that I have is, you're probably a visionary. And so your job is to get the heck out of your own way, your own way of your own big vision, and recognize that there are people that are, so what is it that you want for them? And I say it's a trickster move because it has us extrinsically motivated, but that's working with our strengths, because we're so bloody relational. So let's leverage what we already know to be true. We are deeply relational. So I might not hold myself with reverence, but if I'm paying attention to the fact that that young 20-year-old over there is watching exactly how I move, you better be sure I'm going to model self-care, because that's important that she sees me doing that.
Yes. And this is so much at the root of why I started the Age of Becoming at all, was that I was seeing this, if either a vacuum of models of possibility, or there was a strong cultural patriarchal view of a woman past over 50.
Yeah.
And that was all about no longer valued, no longer powerful.
Yeah.
And I love this idea, even as you say it, the feeling of you are modeling what is possible. And so if that is so, what do you do with that? Right? Yeah. What do you want? Yeah. What do I want my nieces and nephew to know about getting older?
Yeah.
And what do I want them to see and have as possibilities? Ooh, so good. So good. Yeah. All right. I'm Facebook Live.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So let me just see if I can access. I'm just curious if anybody is listening and has a question. I think you can post it. You can post it on the event page, and then I can find that there. And then I'm going to come back to you, darling. And so
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you
Yeah.
something. I want to tell you something. I want to tell you because I mentioned it and then I didn't, but I don't want to not come back to it. The reason I was thinking about this group in particular, as it relates to the conversation that I had with a bunch of collegiate engineers on Tuesday, was one thing that we have going for us. I am 48, but I'm definitely in the landscape of
Oh yeah.
So hi. I did a talk back when we could travel, so maybe 2 years ago, at an annual conference for folks in engineering. I happen to do a lot of work with engineers. Imposter Complex, super up for women engineers. So I did basically the same talk. I kind of challenged myself to do the same talk for, it's my Imposter Complex 101, like what I know to be true about this experience. I did the same talk with collegiates as I did with the C-suite folks to really understand, like my way of doing a bit of research, what resonated with these two different groups, right? So there's the early 20s and then there's sort of 45 plus, 50 plus kind of deal. It was so fascinating to me. So when I walked through the model of the imposter complex, that I understand it, where, there are these 12 specific lies that it has us believe. There are these 6 manifestations. There are 3 main objectives of the imposter complex, and you named it before in part. One is to keep you out of action. The other is to have you doubt your capacity. And the third is to keep you alone and isolated. So those are the 3 main things that it's trying to do. And it does this through those manifestations. It does this through the lies. So the strategies, obviously there's a lot to this, but just to name a thing, are to, if it's trying to keep you out of action, getting really clear about what's actually in the way. That's the strategy, right? Is this an inner critic? Is this an actual objection? Are you dealing with so what's actually in the way? What is actually keeping you out of action? The second is reminding yourself on a cellular level all that you have already done, which is about bolstering your capacity, which is something we get a little bit better with as time goes on. But then we create other roadblocks for ourselves, like, well, whatever, I don't need to name them. And then the third is the gathering our cast, right? Getting the support that we need, surrounding ourselves with the best. And what I found super interesting was with the collegiates, they were tracking. Yes. And then we got to the part about, being with support, being able to gather your people, understanding that you can lean into them, knowing that your people want you to succeed and your job is to let them and your job is to ask them for support. The collegiates were like, nope, shut her down. Like, nope, not having any of it. Whereas the C-suite women, the VPs at Google, and they're like, of course, I would literally not be anywhere if it weren't for my mentors, if it weren't for my ability to believe that we are legitimately better together.
Yeah.
I would not be anywhere if I didn't believe that to be true. And that is the thing that I love the most about, so all of these conversations about mistrust of women, I don't think that's legit. I think that the better we are, the people who are the most successful, the people who are happiest, the people who are most in their lives, who are most present, are those who are reflecting back lights to each other, who are in communities just like this, and who are, and I just think I think it's beautiful. I think it's brilliant. And I think that is so hopeful when I think about your niece, your nephew, thinking about how did you get to where you are today? By believing people when they told me how absolutely remarkable I am.
Yeah.
By fostering deeper relationships.
Yeah. And I mean, wow, there's so much in that. I mean, part of me is deeply curious about what happens in those 30 years between the collegiate who's saying, hell's no, I'm not asking for help, and to somebody who says it would be utter folly. I mean, it would be impossible to not ask for help. That's really interesting. I mean, I guess I know from my own experience that over time, I was just getting more and more benefit from that, exactly as you say, that reflection of the light back. And reinforcing each other's beauty and amazingness and wonder. And I guess it's just a matter of observation, and maybe it's an opportunity for modeling the possibility of that we're better together. This is not a solo gig. I don't care what you do. I don't care if you're an engineer at someplace fancy. Yeah.
And as you say it exactly like that, I think what starts to happen is that, you know, I think if I think specifically about that group, what was happening is there are only so many spots at the top of the class. There's only one top of the class, right? So we got this patriarchal model here. And then but real success looks like this more matriarchal model, right? Where everybody has their own gifts. Everybody has their own, I want to be mindful of not co-opting or appropriating cultural terms, but like the idea of, you know, if we are tribal in nature, if we are a medicine culture then everybody has their own to bring to the collective. So I think that that's probably what happened over 30 years was I have to do this, but then really, if I want the life I want to have, I have to do this.
Right. It's much more circular spiral than linear. Yeah, you know, my husband and I were just talking about the Oscars and just feeling like, well, there it is. There's patriarchy right there, that you're taking art and you're comparing it and saying this one's the best, which is so full of bullshit and craziness that we were saying, like, it makes no sense. When we look at the wonder of having a plethora of offerings, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's genius, and may it be so that those precious collegiates start to experience that in their own lives and integrate that into their experience, their professional and personal and all of that.
And may their mentors talk about joy, and may their mentors talk about spaciousness, may their mentors talk about reverence, right? And
yeah. And I feel like I'm really appreciating the acknowledgement of community and the possibility that we can all be ourselves fully, showing up fully in our power and presence without there being any need for the circle to get, I mean, right? If we are looking at the circle spiral, there's plenty of room. There's always room.
My friend Lena West, I don't know if you know Lena. Lena is an extraordinary human. If you don't know Lena Track.
I don't.
Oh my God,
I will.
amazing.
I will.
Years ago, she did my former program called the Academy. I've noticed I was using my Academy mug. It's no longer, I don't offer it anymore, but she was talking about the community that had gathered there. And I love this analogy. She said, you know, just the nature of the work is unpacking the imposter complex, and the idea being that when you're in community, then not everybody has to row the boat at the same time, right? Yeah. It's okay to put your oar down.
Yes.
You've got a qualifying event in your life, just tap yourself out. It's okay. Yeah. We got you. We are going to keep rowing.
Right.
So nobody on that boat wants to be the fastest. Like, what's the point of being the fastest rower? They're just going to go around in circles, right? Like, we just keep rowing together so that others can put the oar down if they're tired.
Oh, so beautiful.
So good, it's right?
Similar to that, to the analogy of the choir, right? Yeah. That we can sing, and when you need to take a breath, please
take a breath.
Please take a breath, please.
You passing on the stage does not do any of us any good.
Right. You know, you thought exactly. I love it. So, my friend, I am so grateful. And as we start to wrap up, I want to ask one question about what is a practical recommendation that you would have? I mean, you've got the Genius Quiz. You've got so many resources on your website, which I really recommend. The 12 lies. It's a great piece as well, and the quiz is so insightful. But beyond those resources, are there any things that you would suggest for people to help them grapple with how the imposter complex may be showing up for them? What would you say?
Is, as you said it exactly like that. I do think that the training that I have on my site, it's 45 minutes. It's a little outdated. I'm still using the uncertainty language that we were all using back in April of last year. But I think it's helpful to look at the training only because it does speak into the way these behaviors can sort of shapeshift into each other. So we think we've got a handle on comparison, but ding, like perfectionism comes up. So I do think it's helpful to look at it as a system and as a structure. So I think that training is really, really helpful. But here's what I want people to be doing on a daily basis. I don't care who it is. I don't care who you are. Track your wins. We are so lousy at being able to track our wins. We are so lousy to be able to come up with, even just, again, sitting down and looking at this last month and just thinking, gosh, that New York Times article that was so widely circulated about languishing.
Languishing, yeah, I shared it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, that's where my month was. I was languishing. I'm like, the hell I was. I had 3 speaking gigs. I wrote 6 articles. I did all these things, but I wouldn't, because I am not as good as I could be with tracking my own wins. It's so easy to discount all that we have done, right? Yes. We look to the really big things, and when I talk about wins, I mean, like, what are the good decisions that you made? The yeses, the nos. It just becomes, and I don't have a problem with celebrating because I've come to terms with this over lots of years, but the reason we have such a hard time integrating all that we have done, the reason we have such a hard time celebrating and being with that joy is because we feel disconnected from all that we have done. So cultivating whatever the practice is of tracking your wins, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly, just being much more mindful of it. Otherwise it just slips us by.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something
that's genius. That's something that I learned from Tiffany, which Tiffany may have learned from you. Other way?
Well, no, Tiffany is one of my best celebrants. We have a Marco Polo channel constantly going. So I do have lots of different ways to celebrate it. It's vital. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. No. But she has us tracking these things, which I kind of was like, whatever. I'm a rule follower, so I did what I was told. But then at the end of the month, I read back and I'm like, well, look at, just like you say, look at everything that happened. And yeah, so I appreciate that. And I might even like just like up it to say, like, recognize the win and share it with somebody.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, Marco Polo it, send somebody a text and say, guess what I just did? I just did my taxes.
Yes, you did. The reason I think it's so important, just from it feels good, right? It's like the shavasana of yoga, but it's also integrating, because the thing is, the reason I think it's so important to be tracking your wins is we will be at the precipice of expansion tomorrow, next week, next month. And if we do not remember all the moments, and there have been millions of moments before you did that thing, if you didn't lock and load it with some kind of celebration, it's gone, right? We are not very reliable at being able to remember, but because you can say, look at what I did in that last month, the next challenge, you're like, well, if I was able to do all of that, I will probably be able to do this. So when I have clients look at their authority thesis or build their authority thesis, and they're looking at a blank paper, it's because I know they haven't been tracking their wins on an ongoing basis or cultivating that practice in their life. So, that's one of the things I do make sure that I'm doing out loud in my family, to make sure that my kid knows to be doing that too.
Yeah,
that was a hard one by me.
Oh yes, I love it. I think I see some kind of thread in the age of becoming for that, for sure.
Yes.
Tanya, tell us how we can find you. What's the biggest thing that's going on for you? Where shall we go?
Yeah, TanyaGeisler.com. That's where you'll find the training that I think is really, really, really helpful. In my Facebook group, Overcoming the Imposter Complex. And you'll notice it's called Overcoming the Imposter Complex, as in it is active. It is not something that we ever are complete with, that's just the truth of it. And honestly, when I think about people who say they don't experience it, I think it's often because they haven't met that next edge, and maybe they don't have to, and that's okay. So it's really for us, so there's no shame if you don't experience it, but as long as you're continuing to move towards the next and the next, it's going to keep showing up. So Overcoming the Imposter Complex Facebook group, and Tanya Geisler is .com is my site. And then Instagram, Tanya Geisler. I'm everywhere as Tanya Geisler.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing all of your genius, brilliance. And it was a joy to have this conversation.
Joy to be here with you. Truly, Julie Susan, it was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Take care of your jab arm. Okay.
I should have to stop hugging myself.
Yeah. All right. Well, at least, or hug down here.
All right. Bye, Susan. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye.